Hello? Yeah, there we go. Good morning. We'd like to go ahead and get started here.
I think they want to get going.
Good. Good morning. Thank you for being here. This is being televised, so you can go back and watch this later if you choose, or there's certainly for the people who can't be with us today. I know we're deep into the holiday season, and I think a lot of people have holidays on their minds. So I'm happy to see we have a nice turnout. As you can see, I'm up here kind of by myself with my staff today, but trust me, everybody will get this information, and it is extremely valuable to have you all here today. So once again, good morning and welcome to the Select Committee on the Digital Divide in Rural California for a discussion on broadband. I'm Assemblymember Jim Wood, the chair of the Select Committee, and I want to thank everyone for being here today. I represent the 2nd Assembly District, where my rural district faces significant broadband challenges that affect education, healthcare, public safety, and growing a healthy economy. I'm proud to chair this committee to help address the challenges that rural communities face in attaining and maintaining consistent levels of dependable telecommunication services, including cell phone coverage and high-speed internet. I would like to say that it is not just rural communities that suffer. It can often be other underserved communities, inner city communities in urban areas, and it's something we're well aware of. And so as we move forward, while the committee specifically talks about rural, the goal will be to address underserved and not necessarily just rural. So that's as I'm thinking about these things, and as we progress in our discussions, you quickly realize that underserved is a much broader than just rural communities. So while we're focused on the challenges of rural, I believe what we ultimately do will be able to apply to those underserved urban areas as well. So my goal for this hearing is to have a substantive and informative policy discussion on ways we can work together to bridge the digital divide. It's my hope that today's hearing will provide an in-depth understanding of possible solutions which we will use to work together in order to combat the issue of rural remoteness. I'm honored to have with us today experts and leaders who will share with us today their experiences and knowledge to help us identify solutions that will increase broadband deployment and improve the rural quality of life for those that are currently underserved or unserved. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know some of you have traveled great distance to be here for this important hearing. I would like to go ahead and invite our first panel to come up, Mr. Michael Ort, Mr. David Nelson. It will be David first, who's going to talk to us. The topic here is public broadband partnership models. David and Michael will each have 15 minutes, and then we're going to extend a larger 25-minute discussion where we can all collaborate together with some questions. So, thank you and good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Introduce myself.
Please introduce yourself, and then you can do whatever order you want. It looks like David or Michael, you're already set up, so if you want to go first, that's great. Okay. Yeah. So please introduce yourself and.
Hey, I'm David Nelson from CVN Vast Networks.
Okay. Why don't you pull the microphones closer to you guys? There.
David Nelson, CVN Vast Networks.
Great. Thank you.
And I'm Michael Ort. I'm the CEO and president of Praxis Associates, Broadband Development Corporation, Inyo Networks, and I'm the chair of the California Broadband Cooperative. And I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak before this committee and share some of our thinking in the area. I'm probably going to be wearing several hats today. I'll be talking a little bit as a service provider. I'll be talking a little bit about broadband as a contractor and so forth. And what I would like to do is I'd like to touch on regional networks. It's a topic that doesn't get addressed that much, but it has a very important element in the public-private partnership. So let's see. If you can look at this map, it's probably a little bit further away to be able to see, but history always provides us with good lessons, and I think this is a really good place to start. Back in 1895, 3 men were appointed as the California Highway Commission. They rented a buckboard and they rode to all the counties, and proposed a series of highways, and this now serves as the basis for the California highway system. If you look at the map, it should look pretty familiar. In fact, if you really want to have fun, and I have a strange way of having fun, you can go actually onto the map and you can label these routes, and you'll see 101, you'll see I-5, you'll see 99, you'll see Highway 20, you'll see 120, and so forth and so on. So the trigger for this work back in 1895 was the advent of the internal combustion engine and, of course, everything that it promised. And about 18 years later, when the road conditions were absolutely intolerable, funds were appropriated. And you can see that in the process on this map on the right-hand side that it was a partnership. It was a federal and it was a state partnership. Interestingly enough, that $151 million was allocated to California for postal routes. So in a way, there has always been a very close relationship between roadways in California and information. The thing that's fascinating about this when I came across this map is this overarching vision. And it was to make, the idea behind this was to connect all of the California counties, but more importantly at the time, these people saw that California had several different economies that were extremely productive, and they wanted to put it all together. And by unifying the state with these highways, it basically created, as we know today, the world's eighth greatest economy. And there's some tremendous lessons here to learn. The actual work started in 1913. It took about 25 years to build. They put in about 4,500 routes. And they set up a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is basically the main, we call them today, interstates. There were feeders, and then there's the local streets. It's a network. It's just like the networks we have in telecommunications and many other types of infrastructure. So I think we ought to give a lot of credit to the three people that rode the buckboard. Their names actually are, enshrined probably at Caltrans. And we also know that this has been a long-term work in progress. But the other thing we ought to think about is that this becomes the foundation of the physical economy of California. And it's lasted 100 years. And honestly, if you add a few lines down there in San Bernardino and Riverside, it's basically the same network that we had 100 years ago. So what about now? What about today, and what about the digital economy? So when we think a little bit about what we're doing when we do broadband, we try to look at the future because we know that we're building long-term solutions. We also know that we hear a lot of hype about the digital economy. Most people do think it's hype. I remember back in the 90s, there was a chairman of an important telecommunication company that indicated that they felt the internet was a fad. It's turned out not to be. But if you think about the changes that we're seeing today, and if we project forward, I believe that we are seeing probably the greatest change in human society since the Renaissance. I think we're going to see a complete transformation of all of the institutions in terms of the way we transport, in terms of the way we provide medical health care. I think we'll see massive changes in citizenship, and agriculture. You can go on and on and on. And as we looked at this, at one time I used to have a job, it was a great job, to be an economic and technology forecaster. So I tried to look at what was going on, and these were the four factors that I believe are some of the most important things that are happening in the IT industry, the Internet of Things, big data, cognitive computing, and the cloud. And when they come together, it provides a massive capability that we're going to be seeing all the way from our institutions all the way to the individual. I won't get into the details of it, but I will point out that the only thing that makes these work are networks. And the networks, I'm not talking about wireline networks, and I'm not talking about wireless networks, because it's a combination of both of those networks. Some of these applications that evolve in this are going to work much more effectively on a wireless basis, especially moving things that are mobile. And there are going to be things that absolutely need more stable networks that have higher bandwidth that are going to require very, very high bandwidth capabilities elsewhere. So as we start thinking about where this is going, I'm going to argue that this really is the foundation for the digital divide. I believe the digital divide is not access to email, that's today, not access to the internet, not getting Netflix, and maybe not even being able to do homework. I believe it's really the fundamental changes that are going to be really at the basis of life chances, how we are citizens, and it's also about inclusiveness. So I'm going to put up my next slide. I'm going to forewarn you, it's very busy because I couldn't figure out how to layer in the different stuff. But this is a little bit of a question about how prepared are we for the digital economy. And this is the CPUC's broadband coverage map. It's the 2015 map. And it demonstrates that we have about 75 or 95% of the state and about a lot of the urban areas that are somewhat disenfranchised. Admittedly, this map is the wireline map. The wireless map is a little bit different. But you can see from the map that we have regional pockets of digital desolation. And this means it's like they're deserts. They just don't have broadband. And the question is why is this? And so if you look at my poorly drawn purple routes there, these are the original major internet routes. The original internet net routes were designed to provide connectivity between the major metropolitan areas. First application was telephony. They built on it, broadband. But what they were trying to do is they were trying to get to the major routes in between. Now, as a result of that, in those days, the economics were such that glass was expensive, fiber was expensive, and the electronics were expensive. So it wasn't unusual if you were in a town along the route, you were bypassed. There wasn't an off-ramp. They just couldn't do it in those days, and there wasn't a reason to do it. We've been somewhat successful in filling in some of those gaps. And if you look at the little red lines, those are some of the BTOP projects that we've had that were the Community Connect infrastructure grants. So there's Pluma Sierra up in the north, just north of Lake Tahoe. Along the eastern Sierra is the Digital 395 network, and then the CVI network, and I apologize for not making it altogether accurate. It runs from the Auburn area down towards Bakersfield. But it gives you an idea that we are filling in on some of those. And if you look at these routes, you're going to see that's largely where we see good bandwidth. Now, you really can't change the past, and the past has given us what we have. But what we need to do is we need to think about what we can do to the business case, because this is all about a business case. Investment in broadband is fundamentally a business case. The question is how can you put a thumb on the scale? How can you change that business case? So, we did that a little bit with BTOP, but the bottom line is 25 years into the audio age, we had a core Broadway system, but 25 years into the internet age, we still have some significant gaps. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing to cure this and what we've done to fill in the gaps. I have two case studies. The first one is the Digital 395 project, which is now completed. I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but basically it was a $107 million project. It spanned the eastern Sierra. It goes between Reno and Barstow. We serve about 251 community anchor institutions, about 65 connecting points into other networks. It's about 624 miles long. It's a network that's been designed for a 100-year capacity, and we're barely touching. We're using about 3% of the capacity now. So what's been the result? It's been about a year and a half since we finished the network, and what we've seen now is last mile services in the Eastern Sierra have moved from 1 megabit to a gigabit. Last week, Suddenlink turned up Mammoth. That was at one time back in 2013, 1 meg. They now are offering a gigabit service. We have 14 ISPs in the area. We've attracted investors for 21 new gigabit communities by 2017. 21 towns out there are going to have gigabit services. Inyo County is exploring an opportunity to build a gigabit county. We're working with them to help make that happen. From a leadership standpoint, the community anchor institutions have adopted, thanks to partners like Scenic, we have gigabit services to all the schools. We have gigabit services to all the hospitals. And in the process, I was just telling Lewis that we actually are saving the E-rate program a quarter of $250,000 a year because we're providing bandwidth at significantly higher prices, or rates at significantly lower prices. So the other thing, too, that's important here is there was a couple disasters out that way that we were able to avert. And there's a tremendous amount of grassroots economic development initiatives. People are trying to figure out how they can foster the digital economy. The bottom line on this is something I believe in, that it's not just last mile that enables the growth of broadband. Middle mile is absolutely critical. We need to change our thinking about this differentiation between last mile and middle mile. Second case study is Digital 299. It's a work in progress. It's a 164-mile network between Reading, or more precisely Cottonwood, and out to the Humboldt Bay. We're building on our 395 learnings. It's about a $70 million network. We see it a little bit differently than we thought the way we approach 395. We are much more conscious about taking a regional approach. We are explicitly bringing in the last mile providers. And we also are supporting other initiatives. We're working with Trinity County and Humboldt County. We have focus on quality of rural life. We're trying to counter some of the socioeconomic trends. You can read into that however you want to think about the cash crops in the north. And what we're doing is we're taking, for example, in Weaverville, there's a dam, Trinity Dam, that actually generates more renewable power than they use, but they can't use it anywhere else. We're working with the state about deploying a data center there, and we'll be meeting with the CIO and some other people in January. And then we have another project that is going to tie into an offshore cable station to transit the Pacific. And we need landing sites. We're out of landing sites here in California, and all the cables are going elsewhere. So I think what we've seen in this is that these regional projects, these bold attempts to solve problems, they need to be done that way. It cross-cuts across a lot of different programs, a lot of different public policy programs that are fragmented. Some of the challenges we've had, I think there's big challenges on developing these projects. These are typically in larger scale. They cost a lot of money. The funding is in silos. There's not a lot of synergy between them, and it's really tough to build these solutions when you have multiple programs and they're out of sync with each other, both in terms of time and how you have to kind of twist and distort your program so that everything fits together. The other thing is that we've got mixed areas. Not all the areas up there qualify, but you have to serve holistically. I think one of the things that's probably the biggest challenge is that there's no guiding global plan. We need to have a statewide global plan, a lot like the highway system was developed in its holistic, kind of very simplified goals of what it's trying to achieve. The policies that we have are biased towards last mile focus, but as I mentioned earlier, they really combine both middle mile and last mile to provide the needed effect. And we need to be looking at solving a problem. We've got long-term investments, 100-year investments, and yet we're setting short-term goals and setting short-term standards. From a build standpoint, I can't tell you enough that permitting is a real pain in the rear. We spent 2 years out of 3.5 years doing permits on the Eastern Sierra. We had 54 regulatory agencies we dealt with. We spent $27 million on either right-of-way or whatever, permits, studies, environmental studies, mitigation, and they were all basically very standardized things, but it just took a long time to negotiate. We also have the issue of the dig once policy. I was led to the brink of crying as I drove down the 299 corridor a few months ago, only to find that Caltrans had torn up sections of road that probably would have cost $20 a foot to put in while the pavement was out, but it's going to cost about $200 a foot to put in later. And then lastly, once the networks are built, sustainability is a challenge. We really need the state and federal and local agencies that wanted to get connected to these networks, adopt and buy the services, and buy decent services. Don't buy DSL level 3 megabit services. Get the real stuff. The E-rate subsidies are absolutely critical to keep these rural networks and these interurban networks open and working, because they help. It's a way of providing long-term subsidies on areas that are not exactly gold mines to operate. And one of those challenges is property tax. In the Eastern Sierra on Digital 395, we have about a $1.4 million tax bill. It's about 50% of our initial revenues. It's about a third of our revenues right now. It takes about 5 years for these networks to get to a point where they actually move in the black. And it's just because they're expensive to build, they have a big tax base, and there's not a lot of revenue. It takes time to build that revenue. And then lastly, I think we really need to look at the availability of the high-cost funds, both at the state and the federal levels, because these are high-cost areas, and we're helping to resolve those costs, and we need as much help as we can. Those programs are largely focused on telecommunications, telephony, not on broadband. So my time is probably by far over. In summary, I just think we need to have a very bold vision for California. We need to build consensus around a digital economy, not just around broadband. We need to set the bar high for a 100-year solution. We need to target the regions of digital desolation. And we need to figure out the incentives to get the carriers, whether they be the incumbents or others, to focus and accelerate deployment. And I think tax incentives can be very helpful in that, and there's a few other areas. I kind of took a pass on the next bullet, which was only to leave it on your hands, I'm afraid. We need to frame a new workable public-private partnership model. We have many, many of them out there. We can all be creative, and we can figure out a way that everybody wins and we can get things going. We need to remove the barriers. Let's definitely focus on these silos, work with our federal partners, but there's also some partners that we're not tapping here in the state. We need to be looking at carbon credits. We need to be looking at those kinds of programs because broadband plays very importantly into that. And the Dig Once policy is a classic example of that. And the other thing we might be able to do is to accelerate programs, maybe with the iBank. I don't know all their constraints and so forth, but I've talked with them, and I think there may be an interesting opportunity there. And lastly, I think we need to be inclusive. We need to harness the entrepreneurial spirit. And I want to thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the information, and we're going to have a larger discussion after David presents, but so don't run away.